Man, can we go back to like 2005 when me and all my Democrat friends we were just friends and nobody cared that much? We have a massive disagreement on what free speech even means. You can't force somebody to love righteousness. And if you keep telling men they're toxic for long enough, you're going to get actual toxic masculinity. And that's what we have showing up now. This is a revolution of love. It's a spiritual revolution. It's a spiritual awakening, I hope. If he can use me, he can use a donkey. That's right. My new, I just made it up right here.
John Cooper, welcome to UnderCurrent.
What's up?
Hey man, it's so good to have you here. And listen, I'm not a big heavy metal guy, but
you
are. I know. And man, heavy metal, just as a genre, it's got a rage to it, right? I mean, it feels like there's some anger in there. Feels like, I mean, you're going for it. Not only the music, the way it's sung, all that kind of thing. What drew you into this genre of music? Clearly, you have an incredible voice. You could have gone any direction, but for you, what was it that got you going down this path?
Well, that's the nice things. I'd like to say, though, I could not have gone any direction with my voice. My manager can attest to that. But I never thought of it as raging, even though I do know what you mean, of course. When I was growing up, heavy metal was just exciting, So to me, it hit me in the same way that like professional wrestling did, like WWF when I was a kid.
Hulk Hogan.
Hogan.
Who was your guy? Macho
Randy
Man?
Savage.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Let me tell you something, Gene. I love it. I love Randy Savage. It was more like the adrenaline.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I wouldn't deny, yes, there is an element of anger. I think that happened, I would say, for me, probably, if you really want to talk about music, more in the 90s, it kind of shifted into that. The 80s was a bit just more like sex, drugs, rock and roll.
Right.
It was parties, Party Central, thing of bands like Motley Crue and Bon Jovi, and it was all about just excess, living the excess life,
pouring
having it all.
Sugar on me,
pouring
things
some
like
more
that.
sugar on me, which we don't exactly know what it means, but it sounds like excess.
Yes.
Enough sugar to go around and more, the overflow. So for me, it went from that. The 90s took into that darker element. But the 90s was like that with everything, right? Film.
Right.
You see Fight Club and American Psycho. And so all of a sudden the film also goes from the excess of Rambo 3, and like the action films that were over the top to like gritty, real. And that was the shift for me. That's when I already loved music. But that's when I got really like, man, we could really sing about our faith in this music, because the 90s was all about being real. It was about being authentic. I don't want to just act like it's all about having all these things, because the reason there was so much rage in the 90s is because the 80s lied to us.
Yeah.
Our parents lied to us. They said, if you get the college degree and you get the job and you get the money, everything's going to be awesome. And the rock stars were like, well, yeah, but if you get the drugs and if you get the sex and the hedonism, you're going to be so happy. And then, 1991 hit and Nirvana was like, I'm not happy. Yeah. I've got all of that and it ain't doing it. And so you had that kind of nihilistic rage of the 90s. So for me, music was exciting. It was adrenaline. It was fun, but it's also a chance to be real. And that's what Skillet does. So we try to have, certainly some people could listen to it and go, oh my gosh, it sounds really angry. But the funny thing is that most people that listen to Skillet are actually always saying, it's so positive. You guys are such a positive band, because they kind of get what we're singing about.
And it's honest. I mean,
it is very honest. And I meet people. Literally every show, I meet somebody that's like, your music is the reason I got into recovery. Your music is the reason I came back to Christ or came to Christ. It's and I always like to tell those stories, and I'll hit my manager and I'll say, it's incredible what God's doing. This is not bragging on us, because you can't make these things happen. This is the Holy Spirit doing the work of God through things that I sometimes have a hard time imagining he's doing, but if he can use a donkey, he can use Skillet. That's how you like to say it.
Yeah. Well, I think
even you.
Yeah, that's right.
You're
even
worse
me.
than a donkey. Yeah. So if he can use a Gabe, he can use a donkey.
Yeah.
I'm just joking. But that's a good one. I should use that for myself. If he can use me, he can use a donkey. That's my new. I just made it up right here.
22 million albums sold internationally. I mean, the music now has had a staying power because of that consistency, because of your voice, that you're honest. I mean, I feel like you consistently throughout your albums, you're speaking to the moment. You're giving people voice for things that maybe they didn't even know how to express or how to say. You're doing that now with your new album, Revolution, and it's amazing. I mean, you're hitting #1 on the charts with the singles that have been released. You're getting a little bit of feedback too, and I'm curious what the feedback's like, because in this particular cultural moment, you're making some statements. You're talking about, you have a song called All That Matters, and you're describing faith, family, freedom. These are the three things. Like, this is it for me.
Right.
Talk about why did you feel like you needed to go there? Some would say, man, it's so political. Why?
Right.
But let's talk about those topics. I mean, why are those topics so important to you, and why right now were those important themes to bring right into the middle of the cultural moment?
Yeah. I think because I don't know when people would want to say this started. Probably happened for different people at different times. 2020 was obviously a landmark for a lot of people to go, that's when I realized our culture was off. I think we still have people since then that are going, in 2020, I didn't know it. It took me till 2022. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. You know, you're starting to uncover some of various things. For me, it happened earlier than that. Probably around 2015, 16 is when I started noticing what I would call sort of a postmodern culture and sort of the kind of the relativism of the day, the belief that there are no certain truths, there are no certain absolute moral standards that I can put my feet into and I can know are going to be sure forever. I started seeing that the culture was going that way. And it was very, it's disorienting when you first notice it and you start hearing people say things like, my truth, well, she spoke her truth. And so we need to believe women who speak their truth. And I'm like, are they just using weird terminology that I don't understand? Or is that the new cool way to say, she was being honest? I don't know what they mean. Her opinion. Is it just cool? And you start delving into it. And then I started seeing how that was even affecting, in my opinion, the church. The evangelical world started taking on some of those statements, more in what I would call the kind of secular social justice or critical social justice movements, adopting some of that language, and I didn't know what they meant, and so I had to read a bunch of books to try to understand. And so I wanted to write this on my faith, my family, my freedom. It's all that matters to me, because what we're in right now is such I think of like the old miners, the gold, those big sifting things. You put all the dirt in, you're sifting it down to see, okay, what's going to fall out? What's going to actually be lasting at the end of all this postmodern gobbledygook and all of our language? What's going to be there at the end of the day? And the Bible says the flowers fade, the grass withers, but the word of God stands forever. So we have our feet into something solid. And if our feet are into something solid, then certainly that should give me an idea of how to live my life. And then I don't have to be thrown around, thrown around by whatever the culture tells me this week you're not allowed to say, or you have to believe. And I just thought, I think a lot of people feel the way I do. Yeah. And so let's just get to the bottom of that,
Do you think this youngest generation is losing the concept of what freedom means? Because it does feel like we're living in a new age where they've kind of grown up in a situation where there's tons of controls being implemented into their life. They don't always realize it, right? It's even on our smart devices where they're being monitored. They're being surveilled. They don't have privacy. Like, these types of things are changing dramatically, but you almost look at a younger generation and they don't really know what full freedom was or what it should be.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of issues. Maybe I first would talk, excuse me, I'm sorry. It's like 9 a.m. People watching need to understand. I'm a rock and roller. It's 9 a.m.
This was early this morning.
I'm going to be sounding rough all morning. Haven't eaten my Wheaties yet. Back to the story. I think we say this in a few ways. I think that the church, in my humble opinion, has not done a great job of teaching what I would call Christian philosophy. We've got a lot of theologians. We have a lot of people talking about culture commentators. We don't have a lot of Francis Schaeffers, and we really need that. And so I think that even in the church, we're not talking about what true freedom would look like, these principles. And so that certainly, because the church is supposed to be training, in my theological lane, if you will, the church is supposed to train the world on righteousness because we have the truth. The truth is built on Christ. So we are supposed to be training the nations in what righteousness is. But if the church doesn't know, how do we expect the world to know? So certainly, it's not just a younger generation that doesn't know what freedom is. Even right now, it's the older generation. I've been saying for a while that I don't believe people keep saying there's so much political, what do they call it, polarization.
Yep.
But it's not really about right and left anymore, because for me, all of my friends that I grew up with, even 10 years ago, that I would call liberal Democrats, center left, I'm finding them agreeing with me on tons of stuff these days. We still disagree about abortion. I'm talking about my non-Christian friends. We still disagree about that. But we agree about most of the other stuff. So what I'm finding is that really it's about this definition of freedom. What is freedom? Mm-hmm. And are the principles of America good, or are they actually bad? Like those kinds of things. So maybe I would say this. As I had understood American freedom and Christian freedom, we see this in the Catholic philosophers, freedom is the freedom to pursue virtue, right, not just the freedom to just do whatever you want to do. And so, yes, now it's just if virtue does not have a static meaning, well, then me and my good friend who's not a Christian believes that I don't like freedom because no, I don't believe a woman should have a choice to end the life of an unborn child. Well, they say, well, then you don't like freedom. Well, now it's because we're not defining virtue the same, because all that politics is morality applied. And so if you don't have a static belief system that we all agree on, we'll never agree on freedom either.
Yes.
So I think if the church can come back to teaching a biblical philosophy, it's theology applied to life, then we're going to keep losing the day. And I think the more the church keeps saying we don't need that because it's all about the gospel and we don't need those things, then I think what they're going to find is a church that is totally bifurcated, the spiritual realm from the physical realm, and is fine for the devil to own the world as long as we go to heaven when we die. And that is way against what I personally believe in my theology.
Well, and I love that you referenced Francis Schaeffer. He's somebody I've relied upon a lot and learned so much from. I mean, it's amazing to me going back and reading his books from 1960s, how much he's predicting where we're at right now. I mean, he's saying all this stuff's going to happen. Like, we shouldn't be surprised to see where this philosophy starts to play out. And in your book, you talk, your book, Wimpy, Weak, and Woke, another 3-word statement, right? Faith, family, freedom, weak.
Oh, yeah, I like that alliteration.
Wimpy,
apparently.
Weak, and Woke. I know. So I think, even in that, you're really pushing into where Francis Schaeffer predicted we were going. You talk and describe and educate with incredible footnotes, by the way. Great job on this. I mean, it's a great read to see how deep you go in trying to help people understand the roots of cultural Marxism and where those ideas come from that are playing out today. And I know some people, they're hearing on Twitter like 1-minute segments where people are talking about Marxism and they don't think it's real. They don't. They're like, we don't live in communist China. So how or what you're describing doesn't feel like that's real in our life. But would you describe a little more for our audience just how you see Marxism under the current of what we're experiencing even in American society today? Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's a great point you just made. You see a clip and people are like, this isn't Marxism, it's alarmism, and it's and again, I think it's just it's such a deficiency to understand worldview, and I don't mean that means everybody has to agree with me. But to understand where someone's coming from when they say a thing and go, okay, what they mean is you're seeing the foundation of this, and if you follow it out, it could end up in full communism, or some sort of new version we haven't seen yet. That's sort of a mesh, right? And I think they just don't understand it. I think the easiest way to say it is this. I believe that it's Jordan Peterson that calls it meta-Marxism. I don't know if he coined that or not, but I'm trying to give credit where credit's due. I don't know who made it up. Meta-Marxism is a great way to say it. It's basically saying it is a worldview. It is a worldview that says everything in life comes down to two groups of people. You're either a victim or you're a victimizer. You're either the oppressed or you're an oppressor. And so we are living in that culture as we speak. And you see all the offshoots in all of our various identity politics, whether it's radical feminism, whether it's like the ongoing race conversation. And that is not to say that everybody that talks about race believes in meta-Marxism. That's not what I'm saying. But there is this undercurrent of, okay, that right there begins to give a different worldview than what I believe the biblical worldview is, right? And your responsibility as an individual with agency and things like that. And so what I think we're seeing in America is definitely this kind of penchant. Is that the word they say? Penchant. That's French, I think. I don't even know. That this penchant for just victimization and always wanting to lean into that and saying, if you have committed a crime, it's because society dealt you a bad, it's not actually your fault.
Right.
It's society's fault.
There's no personal responsibility.
There's no personal responsibility. And that comes from this really ugly worldview, really that is a Marxist worldview. And the thing is, when Christians start pushing back on that, again, I think it's a failure to understand that Marxism is is an enemy against God, meaning it sets itself up very overtly against God. Karl Marx created this with a hatred of the Christian God first and foremost, and it is him and his followers that say, no, you cannot be a Marxist and a Christian. I think that it was, I footnoted in my book, and now I can't remember if it was Lenin that said it, or Lenin's secondhand guy, and I'm getting my people confused. But he said, no, it's an oxymoron. There is no Christian socialism. Those two things are at odds. Yeah. So
and it competes. I mean, it's deceptive in the sense that it talks a lot about community, taking care of your neighbor. We should all share in this. We should all be equal. And equality of outcome, not opportunity. So and to a younger generation, you can see how it just sounds like spirituality, sounds like a good way to live, to love my neighbor. But that's the deceptive nature of it.
Yes.
I mean, literally, this country was created to resist that kind of thinking and that kind of tyranny that was moving in, and said, no, we need to set this up so that like individuals actually have freedom, actually own their own land. I mean, even that song, have you heard, This Land Is Your Land? I mean, do you know the history of that song?
I don't.
Okay, so did you grow up singing that song?
Actually, I didn't grow up singing that song, but I heard it later.
I mean, it was sung like all the time, I feel like, growing up. It was a patriotic song, but when you get into the lyrics of that song, the guy who wrote it, I mean, you can go read about this now, it was actually a communist manifesto type song. It was saying, this land is your land, this land is my land. Okay? And if you get into the lyrics, you'll see where it talks about on the fence, like the sign, and it essentially is laying out this vision of like, hey, this is all of our land, and it sounds like, oh, this is just, we're good neighbors. But it actually, he was trying to actually undercut this vision of independence and personal land ownership and things like that. But anyway,
fascinating. I did not know.
Yeah,
that.
I'll send you something on it. But
which is really depressing.
Or we'll footnote it in this podcast. Go check it out, and I'll show you more. But I think this idea of helping the church be awakened to these things, because you I can tell. I mean, you're passionate about the church. And I think you draw some pretty clear lines. I mean, you don't like a church that's coming off as unwilling to address big, important social issues, whether that's gender, LGBTQ and sexuality, racism, CRT. I mean, you would see that, I think, in your book as you describe weak and wimpy. I mean, you're talking about Christian leaders, pastors, even perhaps parents who aren't willing to call these things what they are. Why did you feel like you needed to go to that level of calling it out? Yeah,
and I probably would say, and I don't remember, because, sometimes when you write a book, you're like, all right, could I say with absolute certainty, but I feel pretty certain that I wasn't necessarily saying you person are weak and maybe it's more of an ideology. And it's more like this is what we are exhibiting. It's a way of thinking. And the reason I say it that way, which is a little straightforward, the reason I say it is because I think, for the most part, it probably comes from a good motive of wanting to love people. I don't want to get into these things. I don't want to judge people. I don't want them to feel I want them to feel welcome to come to the church. I want them to know I love them and I care for them. And so I'm saying, yep, but the ideology of that is weak, and I define it. It's by weak, I mean it is philosophically weak. It is theologically weak, in my opinion. The reason I think we have to address it is because love rejoices with the truth, and it is the truth that sets people free. So if we are not speaking the truth, then they are staying in their the scales haven't fallen from their eyes.
Right.
So what good is it? What good is it? Well, I know you love me, so I've been a part of the church for 5 years, and because I know you love me, I feel so welcome. But we've never told you the truth of the thing that sets you free. So I think that probably comes into, I would delineate what it means to be set free.
Yeah.
Being set free means being set free from the bondage of the power of sin, the bondage of sin, right? And of course, the power of death, ultimately. So if you're not actually set free from those things, even though you believe in the principle that Christ died for you and rose from the dead, which is great, but you're still living in you're living as if you're in chains, but you're actually not. You're a freedman. Why don't you celebrate that, man? I want to see people released from these things and to walk in victory in these things. And if we sin, He is faithful and just to forgive. We don't want to keep living in it, and we're not judging you for the ongoing wrestle. I expect you to go ongoing wrestle, and you're going to mess up. I'm going to mess up always. I've got a bad attitude, and I start yelling at people, and then I got to repent. But I don't do it like I did 2 years ago. 5 years ago. I don't do it like I did 20 years ago. Praise God, right? So that is why I think we have to kind of come out. Another reason is because I think a lot of people feel like me. They actually feel desperate. Here's a good example. I won't say names. But, one of my best friends is he's not a pastor, but he's on staff at a church. Been a minister now for 27 years. Great man of God. And in 2018, we had a discussion about how do we handle this when he's the one that gets the emails about people saying, hey, I have a son or I have a child who identifies as trans. And I just want to know, is this a safe place for us to come to church to? And he used to, or actually what they would say is, I don't remember the language, but what he's saying is they're basically saying, do you affirm?
Right.
Are you an affirming church is what they're saying. And he said, I handle them with care. And I basically say, this is about a longer conversation. We need to sit down. I saw him this month and I was speaking with him about it. And he said, I got to be honest, John, I don't do that anymore because in his view, culture has shifted. They don't want that anymore because what they feel like is that I'm just not telling them the truth.
Right.
They feel lied to. They feel like I'm manipulating them. They go, well, I don't want to come have a conversation with you if you don't affirm. I just need you to tell me, give it to me now because I feel like you're lying to me. Or they say, I don't want to have a conversation with you if you don't affirm because you're not the kind of place I want to go.
Right.
And he goes, I've really changed on that because culture has changed. He's one of my best friends in the whole world, and he's a much godlier man than I will ever be, I'm sure. But I still disagree with him, even in 2018. We shouldn't lie to people. Tell people, of course it's a place we want you to come to. No, we do not affirm, and here's why. But it doesn't mean it's not a safe place to come.
Right.
And I still would like to get together with you, or whatever your position is. And I think that people are starting to believe that there's a what do they call that? A bait and switch?
Yeah, bait and switch.
They're starting to feel like it's a bait and switch. Like, you sound to me like you're affirming, but then I find out 2 years later you're not.
I feel like churches that live in urban centers, churches in Portland, Seattle, we were part of a few church plants in New York City. I think this is like 2012, 13, 14, 15, when Obergefell was happening. You had the gay movement really moving in, and we had to get really clear early in those kind of spaces about what we believed. The idea of just trying to coax people in and not really be clear and obvious and honest did not work. And you're right, people just left it there. In fact, Tim Keller, we interviewed him one time, and he literally said that to pastors in this interview I had with him specifically about how do you handle this. And he says, pastors, you've got to be clear and upfront because people will leave hurt by the fact that 6 months into being a part of your congregation, they finally find out that this is what you actually believe. That's not fair to them. But it also speaks to like this more clear, bold, convicted speech and like saying what you actually mean, saying what you believe. I see you doing this, but we're seeing like young men they're drawn to that speech. Now, unfortunately, they're drawn to some of this from people that aren't representing a kingdom view of the world.
Absolutely.
I mean, you think about the Tate brothers and Andrew Tate.
Oh, yeah.
Jordan Peterson, though, I mean, he's had that following for probably 6 or 7 years. We saw young men watching 3-hour-long lectures on YouTube from Jordan Peterson when people thought the attention span was like 2 minutes. No, they were hungry for bold, clear, tell me what to think. I'm confused now. And I see in Gen Z this really great opportunity that when you speak clearly and you speak the truth and you help them understand how this world works and how to think about it, they actually respond to that. They're wanting that. So are you seeing a similar thing with your music? I mean, as you put this music out, I mean, you're hitting #1 with these singles on the charts. People are responding. You have a song called Unpopular, you know, where you're speaking about, hey, some of these views might not be popular, but like we got to put it out there. Talk about that theme for you and why you think people are responding and resonating with truth tellers.
Yes. It's so important. This happened. So I don't know if people are interested in this, but hopefully you are. I don't know. Hopefully listeners are. My kind of awakening, if you will, to culture issues. I didn't even know that was a thing. Yeah. Before around 2013. Now, funny enough, I hear a lot of people say this. A lot of people go, it was around 2013 that I started first hearing of these kind of social justice issues. And that, to me, that's when it just kind of became ubiquitous. But I didn't know what to call it then. I didn't know what was going on. It happened to me because 2 things happened within 1 month. I was going into a mall. I was on the road playing shows, going into a mall, on the road, doing my thing, doing what I've always done my entire life because my daddy and mommy taught me to. There was a woman coming in after me, and I opened the door for her. That's what you do if you're a dude. It's just a thing you do to show that you respect women. I don't know. I've been taught my whole life. Opened the door for her, and she was hyper offended. She was like, excuse me, I can open the door for myself. And I was just like, I don't even know. Like, I had no category in my brain for that.
Yeah.
No category whatsoever. I was like, I don't understand what's happening, right? And I thought maybe she's scared of me because the way I look or something. I didn't have a beard, so I was much prettier back then. I was pretty like you. I don't know. I look totally normal. Anyway, within the same month, true story, I was on a plane, and we just landed, and we were getting up. People were getting their luggage. A woman gets up, and she's got one of those things where you carry a baby in the front, but she's trying to hold the baby. And she's holding the baby with one arm with something, trying to get her bag. Yeah. And she was tiny. She was really short. My wife is 5'2", so I'm just kind of used to. I always help women get their bags. I don't know because I'm tall and super tough. Yeah. And that's what you do. You help somebody get their luggage out. And I said, "Oh, I'll grab it." She's like, "Excuse me, I'm capable." And I was like, well, I couldn't believe it. And she's like, you know how you see people and they just keep yanking and yanking. And I was sitting here thinking, oh, Lord, it's going to fall on her. And she finally yanked it out, and it hit her in the head. Oh, and I was just thinking, it's going to make it worse. Like, don't look. Like, just look down like you didn't see it. And I was talking to at the time, this is a long story, but it's kind of funny, isn't it? Yeah. To my tour manager, who is not a Christian, is a progressive. And I'm like, what in the world is going on? And he's explained to me what toxic masculinity was, which I've never heard of. And it made me feel so terrible, like people believe this. This is such a horrible thing. Why don't people understand that there's something better? And if you keep telling men they're toxic for long enough, you're going to get actual toxic masculinity. And that's what we have showing up now with the Andrew Tates and with the people that will say, well, I'll just tell you like it is. If you want to, and now you're seeing an actual poisonous version, a fallen version of masculinity. Right. Right. And that's really bad. Is it a great time for us to be throwing out seeds for the gospel? Yes, because we get to say what true godly masculinity is. Yep. And some of those things that are called toxic are actually godly. Yeah. Male headship. The fact that if your family is going bad, it is on you. That's not for you. It's the woman you gave me, God. No, it's not. Yeah. That's on you, brother. And you have something to say about that. So lead your kids in the fear and the admonition of the Lord, et cetera, right? We say it in the Bible. So, yes, it's an incredible time for harvest because men are looking for that. And we finally have a group of men that are going, I'm not going to feel bad because of that. In fact, it's kind of funny. I'm not going to feel bad because I'm born this way. Yeah. I'm born this way with this feeling that I do want to compete.
Yeah.
Yes, you are. That's good.
Yeah, I want to protect.
Because I want to protect.
And you learn to be a gentleman, right? And take care of those who are around you, right?
You see a woman that can't get her luggage out with a baby.
Yeah.
The right thing to do is say, how can I help?
Right.
That is a good thing. We want babies, and we want women to protect their babies, and we want men looking out to do something nice for somebody.
Yeah, but it's a great illustration of just how much the environment, the social environment, the news headlines, the social media shapes and poisons a person's perspective.
Yes, it does.
To where they can't accept any kind of kindness or gentleman behavior. They're not used to it, or they feel weak because they're being helped.
No, my wife does. Look, my wife does. My dad makes fun of me all the time. He's like, well, why didn't you blah, blah, blah? I'm like, because I can't read a map. My wife reads the map. So my wife does a lot of the...
there are certain things.
Women
do a lot better than men. I mean, and men do better than women. That's just the way we've been designed.
Yes. But my dad would be like, it's a man that's supposed to know where he's going. I'm like, I do not know where I'm going. Corey has to do all of it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But there's like 10 things that apparently are my responsibility that my wife's
Well, I've found in
me
marriage, it changes too. I mean, there were things like Rebecca used to handle all the finances, budget, all of that. And then there was a moment like a decade ago where she's like, this is you. I'm not paying any more bills. I hate this. I'm having a hard time keeping up with it. And so we have gone through multiple seasons of our marriage where I'll take on certain things. I do more laundry than she does today.
Right.
But you know what I mean?
I'm that with the laundry.
And she travels probably more than I do to speak and do things. So you go through these seasons of, hey, we each have roles to play, and we figure it out. Your album, Revolution, I mean, the last time America had a revolution, it was about resisting tyranny. And I think right now we're seeing a lot of tyranny and totalitarianism move in. And some of it's the ideologies, the philosophy that you talked about. Some of it I've heard you even describe in these words like a global elite cabal. People hear those kind of words and they think conspiracy theory and, this is crazy. But man, a few years ago, people thought that. Today, people are paying attention to what is happening with the people that have the most money in the world, the most influence in the world. It seems like there's a wickedness that's happening, that's taking place. We know the enemy's behind it, so it's not as easy as just blaming like there's this one person here and this person there. But there does seem to be a spirit that's moving in that's about how do we control populations? How do we surveil their activity? How do we control the money? We're seeing a hypersexualization. We're seeing pedophilia. We're seeing the Epsteins of the world, the Diddy's of the world. I mean, these are the things now coming out. There's a great exposure. The light's being shined on this. So when you talk about revolution, I think it's important to define like what's the revolution right now? What do you believe we're revolting against? And then how as Christians are we supposed to revolt?
Yes. Super great question. And there's a lot of angles. Let's talk about Skillet first, the album, Revolution. Yep. The album Revolution, for anybody that hasn't seen the cover, I'm holding a flag. It says Skillet. And then I put a Bible verse, a Bible reference on the flag, 1 Corinthians 13:13. And that scripture says, but these things remain, faith, hope, love, the greatest is love. I put that on there so that everybody understands that the revolution I'm talking about on the record is not political. It is, God forbid, militaristic. It is not violent. There is none of that. We're not wanting to burn anything to the ground. That's why I put the scripture reference that everybody knows up in here. This is a revolution of love. It's a spiritual revolution. It's a spiritual awakening, I hope. The reason I did it for the record is because as much as I talk about politics and I love politics, I mainly love political philosophy. I do enjoy politics as well, if you will. But as much as I talk about those things, even if everything I wanted happened, the person I'm voting for president, the people I want in the Senate, the people I want in the House, even if I get all those things, that does not save America. We are all, because people's hearts aren't changed. So I have kind of an amalgam of these things you hear people say. I hear a lot of people say, you can't legislate morality, quit being about politics. And that, of course, is a statement that has a lot of different meanings that is actually not true.
Right.
Of course, we legislate morality. You can't go
Yeah.
you can't go steal your neighbor's house, right? We legislate it. But I do understand what they mean. To their point, you can't force somebody to love righteousness. Yes, of course, that's absolutely true. And so what we see is this. Even if I vote all the people in and they all get in and they try to do something by law, we have a problem. I don't know if this is correct, so people go do your own research, but my point is something like 52% of women who call themselves Republicans prefer Roe v. Wade to what we are in now. And I think men's probably similar. I can't remember the actual thing. Well, that means we have a problem. You know what I mean? Even if you get everybody you want in, what we have is a problem of we don't actually hate this like we say we do. It's still going to be, I think in 2021, 42%, I believe, 41 to 43% of women who had abortions in 2021 had already had an abortion before. And so, and a majority, approaching 60% of women who had abortions in 2021 already have a living child. They've already given birth to a child that is alive, that they have either raised or has been adopted, etc. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that because it speaks to this issue of, well, if we just gave more money, if we just did more of this, if we just did more of this, it's not the case that people don't understand how they are getting pregnant, is what I'm trying to say. So we have a moral problem in this country. Also to the point, even if you get all the people you want in there and you get all the laws you ever wanted, we have the highest rates of teen suicide in American history. What are we going to do about that?
Yeah.
The highest rates of depression, the highest rates of medicated kids for all sorts of reasons. And I mean medication like for depression and for all sorts of what we would call like mental health, right? We have a major problem in this country. So that is what the revolution is about. But I do sing about things like freedom of speech. And so going back to your other question, I just think that what I would not from my music. Let's move on from Skillet music into my side hustle, which is me speaking on social media. Is just to say to Christians, when we say there's a global elite and people go, oh my gosh, that just sounds like such conspiracy theory. I think what I'd want them to understand is this. Before 1776, as you mentioned, that revolution, you had our founders speaking up for a decade. When there was an infraction from the government, they would say, hey, that's tyrannical. You're not allowed to do that. They didn't say, don't be alarmist. Stop being alarmist. It's not like all of a sudden it's going to be full tyranny and they're going to, bring a king over. They didn't do that. They understood you stop it where it starts. It's just like, we're always telling all of our daughters and wives and women, you always go get those breast exams early. You're always hearing, you got to catch this. My mom died from breast cancer, so it's like a thing that's always preached. You got to get it early. You catch it early. Don't wait until there's an issue. It's the same thing. They spoke up against tyranny, and in the end, they said, no, you don't have the right to just all of a sudden claim you're just going to come tax us without us having representation over there. We're not willing to do it. And they stood up. And so I think what I would say for Christians is if you start to think that we're being like totally alarmist because we say, hey, you don't have the right to what would you say? To take my social media page down just because I spoke truth about abortion or a radical gender theory, or I went to the public school and said, well, you don't have the right to teach this to the kids. They don't have it's not legitimate authority for them to do that. And we stop it now so that we don't see the full tyranny.
Yeah, and I think some of probably the 1760s, before the revolution, people had fought and done so much to just try to build a life and create a life. They had something to protect that they understood what it had taken, what it had cost. This generation, I mean, we've had the most comfortable lives. We've seen everything function the way it should function. We just assume everything's going to be there, supply chains, like everything. So I don't think there's that deep conviction of like, we've got to hold the line here because this is coming. And I also think we're so inundated with content and social media that it creates this sense of distraction coupled with distortion. We don't really know what's true anymore. We don't know who to trust. Who are the sources? Should I listen to John or should I listen to this person? People are getting confused. It's going to become an age, I think, where trusted sources, who you're listening to, is going to matter. And we've got to look for people who've been trustworthy over time. They've been consistent. The things they've told us about perhaps have come true. And so we start to rely upon that. But I think when we talk revolution, I mean, we're in the season now where this country is so divided. I mean, there's films this year called Civil War. There's discussion about civil war or secession or states. I mean, that kind of just getting into your political framework, not the Skillet framework. But when you think about politics and you think about where this country's headed and you hear things like civil war, and you know that usually means kinetic. It means physical bearing of arms, like people attacking, violence, right? So for the Christian, how would you encourage Christians if that kind of rhetoric starts to heat up and there's more and more discussion like that? Because things, let's say over the next few years, get really tough. How do Christians engage that without being weak and wimpy?
I probably would say, I love what you're saying, and I probably would love to hear that podcast with someone else besides me.
Yeah.
I don't think that I think that's a little above my pay grade. But to not answer your question like a politician would,
that'd be weak.
Listen. I was born in a middle-class family. Yeah. No, I'm joking. That's what Kamala Harris always said. You go straight to the... You got to understand. There are aspirations and hopes and dreams, Gabe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, but to not answer your question, I probably would say this. I think it would be great now to do everything we can do to hold this together. And I think that one of the ways we can do that is to keep teaching whoever we can. Maybe it's just conversations with your friends, you know, who don't agree with you. You know, most of the people I tour with are not Christians because my crew is not like-minded in that way. My band members are, of course, but a lot of my crew are not. And so we have these conversations. And a lot of these things is more, I mean, I hate to use the word educational because I hate saying like, we to educate people. But there is this sort of, okay, can we have a conversation about what is it we're trying to hold on to? And so we're back to the sifting. We talked. You're mining, you're sifting. You put all the dirt in there, and you're sifting it through. What's going to fall out at the bottom? And could we agree that the principles of America are worth holding on to? You know, I did a podcast recently with somebody who is not on my team, on lots of ways, and he was saying, well, then why do you think people say "Make America Great Again"? Because when was it great? I mean, you're talking about slavery, you're talking about redlining, you're talking about this and this and this. And I said to him, I said, well, I just want to be really clear. I've never said make America great again. I've never gone on and supported Trump. You've never seen me do that. So that's not me, but I know what people mean when they say that. They don't mean I'd like to go back to 1840 and live as if it's 1840. What they're saying is can we go back to a time when we all agreed these principles were good? And those principles were supported by Frederick Douglass and MLK and people that said the principles are really good. Now apply them to me. You know, now do black people. Now do brown people. You know, that's what they're saying, you know, and it's a really great thing and it's wonderful. If we can agree on those things, that the government does not have the right to come in and tell me how to raise my kids, then we can be all golden, you know, and doesn't have the right to say, well, yeah, we believe in free speech, but not hate speech. Now we have a massive disagreement on what free speech even means. So I wouldn't say that I would know what to do on those things, but I would say in the time being, I would encourage Christians to begin to do everything you can do to have those conversations, to gird it, you know, gird up, buttress it. This is what it means to love freedom, and we do not have to agree. That's why I'm like, man, can we go back to like 2005 when me and all my Democrat friends we were just friends and nobody cared that much. It was like, well, yeah, I care, but not like, you'd never lose a friend on if you voted for Bush or not.
Your identity wasn't wrapped
absolutely
up.
Not. And I think that's, in my view, is because at that point, in my progressivism hadn't yet become so powerful. And so being on the left wasn't a religion at that point. I think it's sort of a religion now.
Yeah, and even people on the left then would say it has become a religion and therefore we have to leave it. I mean, you got people
Yes.
abandoning that party that before would have completely been advocating for it. So it's definitely, things have shifted. The lines have moved.
Yes.
That Overton window kept shifting. Well, John, it's so great to just get to hear some of your unedited thoughts. I appreciate the way that you do live out your faith, and you're very clear, you're vocal. People know where you stand on things. You don't mind mixing it up, and good conversation on theology, on philosophy. I think these are the kind of conversations Gen Z is longing for. They're wanting to see this kind of honest dialogue about the issues, and somebody that's willing to do it, that's also had some success in the world, where you live this out with your crew. This isn't just like pontification. This is like every week for you, having dialogue with people. And so thank you for being with us, and keep making great music. And we look forward to keeping this conversation going next time around.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.